Hello and welcome to Just Between Us. I'm Andrew Egger, filling in again this week for Mona Charon, who will be back next week, joined here by my good pal, Will Saletan. Will and I go way back because I don't know if Will wants to tell me this story, wants me to tell this story. When Will was first coming on at the Bulwark, I had just left, and he kind of hit me up like, what's the deal with this place? Or should I go aboard? I was like, yeah, it's great. Go work there. So he did. And then a few years later, when I was coming back, I did the same. I was like, Will, what's the deal with the Bulwark? Should I go back? He's like, yeah, come on back. We're having a great time. Here we are, both having a great time. We tricked each other into joining the Bulwark. How you doing, Will?
Great. So this is great. We got the Egger Saletan echo chamber. We've talked ourselves into coming here, and we're somehow trying to communicate that to the rest of America why they should agree with us.
We were hoping that the news of the day would provide some opportunities for disagreement, and we're going to try to find some spots to pick at along the way. In theory, that should not be hard. You're pretty far out to the left, I think, of where I am on a number of things. But unfortunately, a lot of the news right now is sort of easy to analyze morally in a lot of respects. Actually, kind of why I left the Bulwark in the first place. Back in the Trump era, I was worried. I was like, the news is so stupid. I'm such a young man. I can't just count on the news remaining this stupid for indefinitely into the future, right? At some point in time, the news will stop being so stupid. I'll need some subject matter expertise. I better go acquire some, but it turns out here we are, 6 years later than that or whatever it's been, and still pretty stupid, unfortunately.
Yeah, never second guess stupid. Stupid will be with us forever. Stupid is apparently what a lot of people are. So here we are.
Yeah, I always think of that Matt Christman tweet from Inauguration Day in 2017, and I'm going to paraphrase it, but basically today is the stupidest day in American history, a record that will be surpassed by every subsequent day in American history. So we'll see. We'll see. I don't like to believe that's true, but it's held up okay for the most part since then. So let's. I feel like I'm being kind of jovial and jokey. A lot of the stuff we have to talk about today is pretty grim. So at least give people a little taste of some of that right off the bat. I wanted to talk, for starters, about all this stuff that's been going on in LA. It seems to have settled down a little bit, but you never know. I mean, there were still some protests last night, not the same sorts of outbreaks of violence and vandalism and arson and things like that we saw a few nights ago. For the time being, it appears that the deployment of the federales of Trump sending in the National Guard and then the Marines later has not led to a further escalation of violence, which is good, which a lot of people were worried about. I wanted to talk just a little bit to kind of roll the clock back, because we just got some interesting new reporting from the Wall Street Journal just a little bit ago here. The White House marching orders that sparked the LA migrant crackdown. So just kind of rolling back to how this all got rolling in the first place, which has had to do with, as with so many of these immigration stories, with Stephen Miller over at the White House, who has been kind of the hard-charging guy. I mean, Donald Trump has always been the person who he makes some big proclamations of stuff that's going to happen, and then he doesn't really follow up, he doesn't really enforce, and whatever does end up happening, he will then just kind of spin as a great success. But a lot of times, it's the mooks behind the scenes who are actually in charge of trying to roll those things forward, and nobody more so than Stephen Miller, who's a real ideologue about this sort of thing. I mean, he really wants to see, undocumented immigrants shipped out of the country by the truckload every day of this entire administration. So he, in this reporting, had basically been lighting a fire under federal law enforcement and border security officials, basically saying, all right, where are my mass deportations? I want to see my mass deportations. I'm going to quote a little bit here. Agents didn't need to develop target lists of immigrants suspected of being in the U.S. illegally, a long-standing practice, Miller said. Instead, he directed them to target Home Depot, where day laborers typically gather for hire, or 7-Eleven convenience stores. Miller bet that he and a handful of agents could go out on the streets of Washington, D.C. and arrest 30 people right away. Who here thinks they can do it? Miller said, asking for a show of hands. ICE agents appeared to follow Miller's tip and conducted an immigration sweep Friday at the Home Depot in the predominantly Latino neighborhood of Westlake in Los Angeles, helping set off a weekend of protests around Los Angeles County, including at the Federal Detention Center in the city's downtown. On Saturday, Trump ordered 2,000 National Guard troops to Southern California, despite objections by Governor Gavin Newsom. Now, we were talking a little bit about this yesterday, about just kind of the escalatory effect of this, the kind of moral and ideological complicated questions that surround kind of the issues of kind of like what's an appropriate response to So okay, well, let me put it this way. We've talked a lot about kind of the correct response to illegal actions on the part of the White House. What seems to have sparked this was a different thing, right? This was not the White House acting illegally. This was the White House cracking down aggressively within the bounds of the law, at least according to this reporting and some other things that we've seen. Basically, just going much more aggressively after migrants who were in the country peacefully and working productively and getting hired by Americans who wanted them here and things like that. Like that's part of what has sparked this. Again, obviously in Los Angeles, very mixed city in terms of majority Hispanic and things like that. Let's start there. I just said a lot of stuff. What do you make of kind of that preliminary sort of crackdown that we've been seeing broadly, and then in this case in Los Angeles?
So one of the fundamental questions there's questions of federal versus state power. There's questions of authoritarianism. There's questions of immigration. One of the questions that's going on here is the federal government under Donald Trump trying to solve a problem, or are they trying to create and accelerate a fight? So there was an understanding, there was an explicit promise that they were going to start with criminals. We're going to start with people who are, in this country illegally and have committed crimes. What this Wall Street Journal report is about is like, no. First of all, we knew a couple of days ago that they had increased their quota, that they said, well, you got to arrest more people, right? But now we have an explicit statement that they were not going for criminals anymore. They're just like, we want to have more arrest. We're going beyond the category of people we said we were originally targeting. As you put it, people at the Home Depot. This is how I think they got Abrego Garcia. He was at a Home Depot parking lot. This is, first of all, reflecting the dishonesty of the original promise that they were just going to focus on the criminals. But secondly, it goes beyond solving the problem, and it goes to an escalation. There wasn't a fight in Los Angeles as long as they were just targeting criminals. So they expand the portfolio of people they're targeting. Stephen Miller says, go after this. This provokes more protests and some violence and people waving Mexican flags and stuff, which in turn provides Trump and Stephen Miller with the basis or pretext, however you want to look at it, to send in to federalize the National Guard, send in the original group of the National Guard. And I mean, I think you can make a pretty good case that Trump is looking for the escalation. And the latest illustration of that is he had the mayor and the governor told Trump, hey, we got this under control. We can handle the protests here. Trump says, no, I'm sending in 2,000. I'm seizing the National Guard. Hasn't been done since segregation, right? Since the 1960s. I'm going to send in 2,000 National Guard. Then Trump says, I think yesterday, we have this now. I've sent in the Guard. Thanks to me federalizing this, we have it under control. Then after he says we have it under control, I have it under control, they send in 2,000 more. They send in 2,000 more National Guard and 700 Marines they've mobilized. So the escalation is continuing on the side of the government. Okay, now, this is not the protesters. On the side of the government after they've said they had it under control. Plus we have Stephen Miller, and Donald Trump talking about how this is a 90-10, 95-5 issue politically. So we have all the evidence here that Trump is looking for a fight, looking to escalate the fight, and that he sees it as politically profitable. That's my very cynical take, but I think there's evidence for it.
I mean, look, we're going to find places to disagree, I hope, but I could not agree more with you about this. I think that when we talk about immigration in particular, this is maybe more so than any other policy issue. This is a policy issue where the specific stories that bubble up and kind of shape the national conversation around these things have an enormous impact on public opinion in this issue, because it's an area where most people's beliefs are largely kind of emotively shaped, right? You're either bouncing off of a bunch of stories of kind of like lawlessness and disorder and criminal gangs from Central America running around unchecked. You're seeing that in the media, and it's making you more reactionary, or you're seeing stories of overly aggressive crackdowns and people being dragged out of their homes and productive workers, like having their car windows broken by ICE, and you're getting dragged in a more kind of libertarian direction on all of these things. And when you look at sort of public polling, there's a huge gap, right? There's a huge gap. CBS just had a poll out yesterday where it was like 55% of the public are basically on board with the project of we need to deport a lot of people, but 55% of people are also on board with basically saying, yeah, and the way Trump has been going about this, we don't approve of that. So like there's a huge amount of kind of confusion and malleability, plasticity in public opinion on this issue. And I think that you are absolutely right that what Trump wants is not to have this situation where it's kind of a question of law versus lawbreakers, right? I mean, that's kind of the problem he's had all along, right? With these initial sweeps. That's part of the reason he's bled some support even on this issue, is because the whole El Salvador deportation, scandal and things like that, all of these different ways in which they've been trying to get around various immigration courts, making the argument they should be allowed to short circuit these immigration courts. These have put them in the position of being sort of the party that's outside of the law. And they don't want that at all. They want to flip that script, and they want I think they basically want either one of two things. They either want to get to take up the mantle of law and order, and be the people who are, with the cops, cracking down on the protesters, cracking down on the rioters, and sort of re-seizing that mantle of we're the ones who are going to, make things go back to the way they ought to be. Or at the very least, they want to be able to kind of set aside questions of law altogether, right? They want to just be able, and Trump has kind of made this case, right? I mean, he's basically said, yeah, he's kind of acknowledged, yeah, previously I said I wasn't allowed to send in the guardsmen. There's no law that really authorizes me to do that over and above, the objections of Gavin Newsom. But also, what do you want me to do? There's a lot of rioting happening in there, and we need to go stop it. And I mean, that's kind of an explicit argument that we need to set aside the law, and there's just these two groups of people with power. There's, the rioters, and there's us, and you should throw in with us because you don't want the rioters to win, right? I mean, isn't that kind of explicitly the argument he's making, even while he is talking in language of law and order?
Yeah, absolutely. And what Americans need to understand is this is how authoritarianism has happened in other countries. There's a legitimate problem. Like in Europe, they had migration coming from North Africa, from the Middle East. It was out of control the same way migration has been out of control in this hemisphere, in this continent. And all the right-wing parties run against this and say, we need to elect a strong man. We will stand up for you. We will establish borders. So this is a method that these parties use to heighten the contradictions, to create a big fight and come to power. But Andrew, it's really interesting. What you're making me think of with your analysis here is an issue that I'm very familiar with, which is a very different issue in some ways, but actually can shed some light on what's happening. And that issue is abortion, where people, just as you're pointing out with the polling on immigration, people are very conflicted. A lot of people who don't like abortion morally, believe it's deeply wrong, believe it's a kind of killing, also very uncomfortable when they see the government trying to protect life by imposing all sorts of restrictions on women, on doctors, sending people to jail, threatening people with criminal fines, with criminal punishment or with fines. They don't like to see how that moral intuition that abortion is wrong gets enforced. We haven't been here in this country with immigration. We haven't seen an aggressive deportation attempt like we're seeing with this administration. So it's an open question, but it's a possibility that even a lot of Americans who recognize that illegal immigration is wrong, it is literally illegal, and it's people jumping the line, and there's all sorts of moral harms associated with it in terms of how the cartels move people. They can agree with that, and a lot of those same Americans, when they see how it's enforced, may decide that they don't like that they may decide that the way that the government is enforcing the immigration laws is worse than the underlying harms of illegal immigration, such as they are, particularly when, as you point out, we've gone beyond the criminals, and now we're talking about people who are productively employed, are, upstanding members of their community, except for the fact that 15 years ago they came here illegally, or their spouse came here illegally, or whatever. It's really, I think this is uncharted territory on immigration. Correct me if I'm wrong. And the polling that we're seeing now, there's no precedent for it on this issue, and we're just going to have to see how it unfolds and whether it stays as Trump and Miller think, an issue overwhelmingly on their side, or whether it starts to turn against them because of what they're doing.